So welcome again, I'm David Mills, and we are going to go straight to Simon, Marginson and Papatsiba to talk about their book, which has just been launched, and they're on open access on Brexit, EU students and UK higher education. So Simon, the screen is yours.
Thank you, David, and hello Vassiliki at home. And I guess Vassiliki, what we're doing is that I'm screen sharing for the first part. Then when we hand over to you, I'll exit from my screen share and you will go in and you will manage. Okay. Well, folks, I'm sorry about the delay. You can put it down to another effect of Brexit. This malign effects continue to roll out in the UK. If it wasn't for the fact of Brexit, we wouldn't have had our problems today. We'd probably be talking about something more high-minded. Now, let me, though, introduce our project briefly and then bring Vassiliki in to talk about the substance of our research findings. I was the research project leader for the CG project on the effects of Brexit in UK higher education, but Vassiliki is the lead author of our book, and you can see the book displayed on the screen. I think what this Brexit issue gives us is a sense of how the immediate past shapes the present. The predicaments that we're finding with international and communal relations in the UK now, in a lot of ways, come to the fore first at Brexit time. The negative effects of nativism and national isolation on higher education, and especially its students, really begin with the Brexit process. My screen has gone mad, so
That's the maybe sharing.
right. Okay, yeah. This is what we're going to cover today.
It hasn't changed.
I apologise, I don't know what's going on there. Just a moment. Now we have another problem.
Vassiliki, are you sharing the screen now?
Vassiliki, I'm doing the screen share at the moment.
You're muted, Vassiliki. So.
Sorry, no, I'm not. But let me see if something has happened here by mistake.
Yeah.
So, what should I do? Should I say stop sharing?
You stop sharing.
All right. But it would say stop presenting. All right. Yes. I'll stop.
So you're going to share some and then you can.
Well, that's what I thought we were at.
Yeah. I think what happened was that something came in.
Okay, are we back on track now? So I'm screen sharing? No?
Not yet.
Nothing is there. Okay. That's great. I'll have to start the screen share again too.
Yeah, brilliant.
Let's see if that's working.
That's good. You can see it. That's great.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Marvellous. So this is what we're going to cover today. It's just the first substantial empirical study of the effects of Brexit in UK higher education, and we'll run through these topics. We in the UK need to be completely clear about our present predicament, in which an essentialist, nativist, anti-cosmopolitan idea of national identity has gripped the political mainstream. The Brexit is the wellspring of that process. That's where our current politics begins and where the implications for universities and students also begin. On the 13th of September this year, that is just over a month ago, a nativist anti-migration crowd of 100,000, 150,000, no one's quite sure. The official estimate was 110,000, marched through London. And the crowd was predominantly male, somewhat older than average, and of course, largely white. And you can see that clearly in the picture on the left. And it chanted anti-migrant and anti-refugee slogans. There's a good deal of anti-Islamic sloganising. It listened to speakers with conspiracy theories. It listened to Elon Musk telling people that violence was coming. And the story repeatedly from the speakers was about true Britons being replaced by foreigners and the state in a kind of conspiracy in that process. But many followers of the far right in the UK now, as in many other countries, see any kind of cross-border relationship as suspect. And this has serious implications for universities, of course, that are so externally engaged. This anti-foreigner, anti-connection, anti-international outlook has been building for a decade. Nativism first broke into the political mainstream in the Brexit campaign of 2016. Brexit combined anti-EU politics with othering style anti-migration politics. And this toxic combination is still doing the rounds of the far right and has carried the Reform Party, the descendant of the Brexit campaign, into a position where it has a 50% chance of forming the next UK government. And it has an agenda to abolish the effective right to remain in the country, which has been granted to more than 400,000 people, and may bear down heavily on dual citizenship. Now, the vote to leave the UK was so close. I mean, so much hangs on that margin, doesn't it? That missing 1.9% was and it was that missing 1.9% was catastrophic for UK universities. UK universities, by some calculations, were about 90% opposed to Brexit. UK universities and their academic faculty, researchers and students, and the communities around the universities had benefited enormously from the 40-year association with the EU. In research, the UK research sector was flourishing through its role in Europe, through its leadership role in many projects, and through its capacity to recruit talent out of Europe into the UK universities and research institutes. UK universities benefited greatly from larger European talent pools, which were subject, of course, to freedom of movement. People were able to move freely from all over the EU into the UK and live and work without question. And by one calculation, almost half of the new appointments in the Russell Group in the 5 years before the referendum were coming from non-UK EU citizens. Students, lots of European students in UK institutions, and they balance the very commercial tone of the international education of the rest of the world, because the European students were there on UK fee basis. They were not paying in the year of study, they were paying at UK fee levels and not international education levels, which most recent count found to be £22,000 per year on average for first degree students. So EU students were able to come into UK on the tuition loans basis and pay back their tuition loans after graduation on the same basis as UK students. So lots of UK universities were heavily dependent, in fact, on students from Europe. LSE, in its master's program, by one count, had more than almost half of its students from outside UK EU citizens. Another important and overlooked aspect of the European relationship was structural funds and European bank loans. And these bankrolled very important developments in regional universities throughout the UK, particularly in Wales and Scotland. And there was a large number of new buildings and facilities established on the basis of structural funds in the 10 years before Brexit. The research sector outside the Golden Triangle, the Cambridge, Oxford, London universities, also benefited heavily from European structural funds. And at one stage, about 1.5 times European grant awards was coming in through structural funds for research in the UK. The value, though, of European links lay in the collaboration, the networking, the joint facilities, the sharing of ideas and talent. And a lot of that doesn't show in the figures, but the loss of that has been incalculable. And, you know, after Brexit, UK lost its position within the Horizon Europe funding program for 3 years and has come back in on a more attenuated basis, and will not play the same role in research in Europe in the future as it's played in the past. The end of free movement meant the loss of the majority of the academic talent that would otherwise have been recruited. And of course, many doctoral students, especially in STEM disciplines, were playing a key role in British universities coming out of Europe, Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, and so on. Brexit meant the end of Erasmus, the Erasmus Plus scheme, which was bringing 30,000 students a year into the UK, and a big drop in the number of degree enrolments from outside, from Europe outside the UK, to about 40% of its pre-Brexit level. Structural funds disappeared completely, impoverishing developments in many regional institutions in the UK. And of course, the loss of that incalculable shared provision was very significant also. So a lose-lose all round. Just to touch base quickly on the European students quantitatively, everything changed in 1st of January 2021 when European students went from the previous pre-Brexit fee arrangements into the status of ordinary international students paying full fees in the year of study. The effects of that were, on top of the loss of Erasmus, as I said, a 60% cut in the number of new EU students coming in to degree programs in the UK. So this was a dramatic set of events, and as I said, a lose-lose for UK universities. CG's research on this was funded by the ESRC. It was part of the UK in a Changing Europe program, which is looking at the effects of Brexit and the post-Brexit situation in a whole range of industry sectors and social sectors in the UK. We looked at the situation in 12 contrasting UK universities, which are listed on the screen. You can see the bulk of them were in England, but we did go to Scotland, 2 institutions, and 1 institution in each of Wales and Northern Ireland. We conducted 127 interviews. That's a lot of data, as those who do semi-structured interviews will know. We were fortunate in getting access to senior executives in the 12 institutions and academic leaders in the middle levels. We also spoke to administrators who handled international programs, and we also spoke to some governing body representatives and students in some cases as well. And our data tell us a great deal, and we've published various aspects of this, but the loss of European students and the danger of Brexit for research cooperation, those were the standout issues. At this point, I'll hand over to Vassiliki, who will present our main findings, and I'll stop the screen share.
Thank you, Simon. I will try to share my own screen now. And just because I had some connectivity issues at the beginning, I would like to thank CG and David for hosting our first book launch. I do apologize for the earlier issues of connectivity, and I would also like to thank everyone in the room and online for taking the time to listen to our presentation today. We are surprised to have an audience. We thought that no one wanted to hear about Brexit anymore, but I think sometimes, and we also wondered what the relevance of our book would be 9 years down the line. But I had the launch actually gave me a boost, and I considered these issues again after spending, of course, years working on the topic, writing, discussing with Simon, with other colleagues. And I have some thoughts that I have included in the slide. So I'm trying to find exactly that's the final. Is that no? Sorry, it's another final. It's about my teaching. Sorry, I'm trying to get content on the no, not fine. Screen. Try to share my. Or maybe I'll go for the window. Sorry, go for the window, and it is working slowly, as you can see. I hope that yes. Right. So from the beginning, and then I will move to the slide where Simon left it.
Slide 14.
Sharing my screen now and trying to say from the beginning. Right. So I will move through the first 14 slides or so.
You get to see Nigel Farage again.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I should have gone even faster, I think. So I think here it comes one more. Right, so here we have, I'm going to minimize the window. I will just go through the key findings. We focus mostly on the effects of Brexit on European students, because we realized that all of our participants talked about European student numbers. They were anticipating a drop in enrollments of European students, and that appeared a prominent topic alongside research, but this study focuses more on how universities, how our participants talked about students in the various universities. So we had approximately 500,000 words of data. I will not focus on methodological details. If you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer later. But basically, when our participants talked about students, they talked about European students as units of resource, numbers. And they also refer to them as desirable diversity and quality. What does that mean? They talked about the loss of diversity and also how that threatens educational quality. And they also talked about EU students as an object of competition. So try to move to the next. Sorry. Oh, no, here it is. Sorry, it was slow, and then you moved 2 slides ahead. So I will try to unpack a little bit what participants said about EU students, because it's really interesting. Simon gave the numbers about the significant decline. It's something that doesn't surprise anyone, I think. All our participants, 127 study participants, discussed the forthcoming decline, the predicted decline. And they also talked that for the first time, when the vote went in favor of Brexit, the referendum went in favor of Brexit, they started tracking EU student numbers. They wanted to establish a baseline. So in the past, they didn't have a very sort of detailed picture. EU students were paying home fees, and there wasn't any need to track them administratively in a very specific way. They needed to do that tracking because they had to prepare various models and scenarios for the decline of numbers. And they also needed to make the case. They started thinking, are EU students important to us? And if they are, in what ways? So I've included some quotes that I don't need to read everything because time is of essence. Sorry, yes. So, and of course, student numbers are important, but at the same time, we have to see the moment when that happened. It was a kind of perfect storm. There were pre-existing vulnerabilities in the sector that at that at that moment in history, they weren't broadly shared as now. It wasn't broadly shared that international students cross-subsidize research. They weren't, only people within our community, for example, higher education researchers, knew that the funding was sort of a time bomb, and the loans. And so even sort of people who were in middle leadership positions didn't know that the funding model is not sustainable. But then at that time also, UK universities have lost more than 20% of their domestic students, and EU recruitment was used to fill the enrollment gaps. And I like that expression when saying, well, these things, and they started saying these things now are existential. I think for the first time I noticed that the use of the word existential, because they were fearing that institutions are going to go down. And so that senior executive talks about institutions who fill their boots with EU students. So that happened. I'm trying to, sorry, something. Oh, now it goes too quickly. I think I have to be more patient and ask you for your patience as well. So when there was that sort of universal talk within our samples about student numbers, we kind of identified the leadership and academic unit divide. So the leadership view was institutional survival first. We're going to focus on numbers overall and not specific departments. There will be restructuring because some departments are going to lose significant numbers. But after all, these losses can be tolerated if we manage to balance our books overall. And that will also, so they say, yeah, it won't be in the same bits of the institution, but it was that institutional survival first. And also that they also said that there will be a change in the subjects that are offered, because once you do not have the students that you need to sustain the subject area, then the offerings, the curriculum offerings are going to be shaped by market demand. And that Canada was, they were quite impassive about that. So very, very pragmatic, and there wasn't any sort of consideration about important areas of knowledge that have been university business for centuries. I have pressed the button again, and sorry. Right. What is the, they didn't dwell in the intellectual and human cost. So that came when we talked to middle management or middle leadership people, people who were sort of more boots in the ground, were working with academic staff, heads of departments, heads of faculty. Then we did hear about the program vulnerability, and many subjects were at risk. They felt the international perspective was threatened, and they talked about the cascading effects, what that means in terms of reducing academic diversity, the risk of narrowing curriculum choices, the loss of international perspective, and the knowledge preservation was at risk because of the model that needs to be sustained by student fees. And if students do not choose certain subject areas, then these areas become vulnerable. We observed national variations across the UK. Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales had some similar but quite different considerations, also based on their national funding model. In addition, Northern Ireland had pressing concerns about cross-border student mobility and all the issues of collaboration and mobility within across the two parts of Ireland. Then second topic of discussion was diversity. Again, it was 65% of our participants who discussed diversity. And here we have started to shift to more fundamental questions about academic identity. And it seems that Brexit catalyzed this conversation about what is diversity and what defines university. And the international dimension defining university. So there were three key lenses to diversity. One was diversity is a defining characteristic of international universities. The other is, the second is a catalyst for educational enrichment. And it is also a more pragmatic facet. Diversity becomes an institutional asset in global competition, something that you can market. So I go through try to unpack what was under diversity, because that's a very broad term, how it was understood here. It was understood as diversity is part of internationalism, and universities are defined by internationalism. It's not just about growth, about projecting more numbers, it's about our being as a university. That is essential for global outlook and the educational mission. People talked and described the diverse campuses, that visible and audible presence of foreigners on campus. And they also said that diversity was an antidote to national insularity. So the nature of a university is to look out, not to look in, to be a little Englander. They also discussed diversity as something that was valuable within the classroom because it brings different perspectives in academic discourse. It helps the UK curriculum to be less UK-centric or ethnocentric. And they also saw it as an advantage, valuable for locally disadvantaged students who do not have many opportunities for exposure to international perspectives. There was, inside that diversity, there was a clear association with quality and merit. So it wasn't diversity as a disadvantage. It wasn't diversity as a deficit, something that is missing. It was diversity associated with quality and merit. Because our participants said students were excellent academically, they were concerned about losing a high achieving cohort. And there was that tension between sort of like, who is going to come now? And I think this quote is really nice. They're fabulous students. They're really clever. They're very highly trained. They come from school systems that they have trained them well. And losing those students from our cohort would be a big loss. Sorry. Have I missed one slide? I have gone through it quickly. No, I haven't. So then they raised a lot of concerns about equity, that access will be dependent on wealth, that there will be an East and West European divide, and the UK risks of becoming more elitist. So they say we won't be getting the kind of ordinary, middle-class, bright, ambitious kids with an international outlook as we get at the moment from European countries. What's happening? Sorry, I think I need to move the other way. The third topic of discussion, as our analysis, it wasn't discussed in that way. Now you can imagine that we had 500,000 words. So we tried to analyze and see what are the key themes that we can pull out of them. So it wasn't presented as a discussion, let's discuss now diversity. Actually, we didn't ask any questions about student numbers, about diversity or competition. These are themes that emerged inductively from what the participants discussed. So the competition, Brexit was seen as heightening competition and creating what we frame as a compound competition. That is competition for resources, as the university called them. These are students funding a talent. And I think that quote is quite significant. Universities will be almost poaching potential students of one another to fill the spaces. And we can see those effects today. For example, we can see UCL not even having enough visas because they have exceeded the number of international students, whereas other places really struggle to get a significant numbers of international students. So they predicted that the winners are going to appear along the traditional institutional hierarchy, Oxbridge and London-based institutions, and finally also Russell Group universities. And again, a lovely quote, very bitter. People like Oxford and Cambridge have got so much money that it's probably, their reaction. It makes no odds, really. They can go back to their armchairs and eat their roasted swan. So you can see how much bitterness there is. And sadly, I think the reality today has confirmed that Oxbridge and London-based institutions have off the back of international seats, not only European, but even international more broadly. And they would, so again, competition is competition for quality. EU students were higher academic achievers, and they had that fear of quality trickle-down effect, that they will have to recruit at, as the participant here said, at a much slightly lower standard. So that's really an issue for them. Of course, they became more aware of the global competition landscape, the new forces, European universities, the traditional English-speaking countries. Ireland becomes uniquely positioned as an English-speaking country, but also part of the EU. And they talked about the soft power, for example. They recognize that universities do play a role in geopolitics, and that will affect international partnerships, research collaboration, global reputation, as well as the kind of softer knowledge diplomacy and cultural exchange roles. And they were very concerned about insularity. It would be academic insularity, cultural and reputational, because UK universities could be perceived as unwelcoming. So now I'll spend, there are just a few slides, if you can give me a few minutes, because the issue is, why is Brexit still important? And I think it is because it does give us a warning for global higher education. Brexit represented the first major reversal of regional educational integration. So it gave us early warnings for current trends, for things that we observe right now, like rising protectionism in student mobility, growing nationalism in education policy, increasing geopolitical tensions affecting universities, financial pressures on institutions. Two more slides. I want to discuss something that I'm really very sensitive to, and I spent a bit of time thinking about it, because part of the argument was European mobility was a privilege, and so once we restrict it, we bring more equity. And I want to kind of sort of counteract those arguments to say that reducing rights doesn't enhance equity. Removing EU students' rights didn't create equity, it just normalized inequality. And removing rights from one group doesn't necessarily enhance system equity or equity for all. So the loss of EU students didn't benefit other international students. I think there's a false equivalence. If we think that reciprocal arrangements are unfair privileges, these are reciprocal arrangements. The EU membership represented regional educational integration, shared academic standards, reciprocal arrangements, and cultural linguistic exchange. It just made the system more elite, not more equitable, because academic equality suffers when diversity decreases. Universities need protected spaces for educational values. And I think the key argument is that Brexit did not democratize international education. It removed one of the few working models of quasi-rights-based cross-border higher education. And so has it leveled the playing field? I think Brexit instead reinforced national first thinking. The binary between domestic and international divide increased. We have now a purely commercial view of international education. It strengthened market barriers, not opportunities. I think the EU system, despite its limitations, I don't see it as a sort of inward-looking system. I think that it demonstrated the possibility for some merit-based international access, some cross-border educational rights, and I think it was something that could have been improved, expanded. Of course, Brexit reinforced existing inequalities. Wealthy international students still have access. Less wealthy students face greater barriers. Eastern European students particularly impacted. Global South students no better off. And so I think sorry, I'm just trying to, no, I think that was the last slide. I went really quickly. So we're looking forward. How do we maintain international character amidst rising nationalism? All these tensions and trade-offs between financial survival, educational mission, preserving the intellectual capital of universities. How do we protect diversity, equality in market-driven systems? And how do we build or rebuild bridges when politics demand walls? So thank you for listening. I'll stop sharing now.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Vassiliki. Lots of information in those slides, and Simon, you started us off very powerfully with those images. It's a history lesson in some ways. Almost it's too painful to go back to remember how things were 5 years ago. But I think you reminded us quite how impactful Brexit was in every way to the sector, and how it reinforced and catalyzed and amplified existing trends and removed the other mitigating factors, as you put it, Vassiliki. So that was, salutary, and as you say, that the stakes have been made very clear with the current financial situation facing universities. So I'm opening the floor really in the room and online to questions, and I've already got a couple online from Heidi and from Cedric. Heidi, do you want to come in and ask a question?
Hello, yes. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'm interested in postdocs. So my question on the chat was, I do understand that your study is about students, but do you have any comments specifically on postdocs and postdocs mobility? I'm finding very little in the literature on UK postdocs post-Brexit. Any ideas? Thank you.
Yes, I think what we can see is what we call that, or people describe it as the broader ecosystem. So, and these are also compound effects. For example, you had EU academics who moved to the UK. And those academics kept their collaborations with other universities, not only Europe, but also more generally. They managed to attract more students. They managed to attract more doctoral students and postdocs because there were sort of collaborations, organic collaborations going on. So, and those effects. And then we had, of course, the 3 years, 4 years out of horizon with a lot of uncertainty. When will they rejoin? Are we going to rejoin? And what the terms will be? So I think, and we also see that there are fewer EU academics joining. And those, there's a study, for example, that shows that those who join are probably at the less senior level or less competitive because of the salaries that they earn. It was a very interesting study. So I think these are the effects on the ecosystem. So you have fewer EU academics, you have fewer collaborations, you have less funding, you have fewer postdocs coming in. There are the problems with the visa, for example, visa costs. There are restrictions on sort of NHS healthcare. So I don't have the numbers, but I would see that so although universities try to track specific areas, there is something that you need to capture by sort of thinking of the whole system as an environment that one part influences the other part, and then there is a compound effect. Does that answer a little bit your question?
That's helpful. Thank you, Vassiliki. And
Yes.
I sort of want to ask which things the university vice chancellors didn't predict, because they seem to have very prescient insight on what's going to happen as a consequence. Lisa, you have a hand up.
I've got a question for Simon. A key theme that you raised about the Brexit was the problems of insularity, nativism, populism, and the impact on universities. I'm just wondering if we need to step back a bit more and think about the role of nation states in this period of post-hyper, what Wolfgang Street calls hyper-globalisation. So cosmopolitanism was one side of globalisation. The other side was the remaking of national economies and their integration in a globalised neoliberal order, in which inequality soared, and we've seen the gutting of local institutions of democracy. So how do we hang on to the values of globalisation while at the same time seeking to rebuild these institutions of democracy? And I think the university probably has a role there. So institutions that can protect the interests of the most disadvantaged. And I don't think we can do that without thinking about the role of the nation state, and within that, the role of the state. So I'm just thinking we need to maybe start reorienting our conversation to some of those sorts of topics. So just sort of your thoughts on
I completely agree with that argument. And I mean, there's no necessary polarity between national and global. I mean, you can have a globalisation which is a world of corporations and led by tech companies and finance companies that orders the world around separated zones and controls people that way. And I think that's where we're heading. So we don't. Although the argument that's raised by populism is a refusal of the globe. In fact, that's not really what's happening. And Nigel Farage is financed by the global fossil fuel industry. I mean, it's just a mouthpiece. The fossil fuel sector, which is unambiguously global and crosses borders, intersects with states like in Saudi Arabia, but it basically is essentially its own beast. So there's no necessary association between retreat from the global and populism. I mean, I think that the problem that we've got is that cosmopolitanism was seen in the interests of global capital up to about 2014 or thereabouts, 2015, because it was a way to roll out global markets. You could encourage diverse markets, and then everyone would buy the products, whoever they are, and they'd all be tailored for specific localities and specific cultures, but basically, it'd be the same global product. And those days are over. I think that that kind of notion of cosmopolitan being positive clashes with the current project, which is to manage populations by separation, antagonism, and so on. And the price that global capital pays for that is some discomfort with closing borders, because immigration is necessary to global capital too. It's necessary to have global talent moving into tech companies when they want it, and then they've now got to deal with more uncomfortable visa regime in the United States and Silicon Valley. I mean, things like that do come into play, but I don't think there's much concern about the mobility rights of anyone else. So it's not really a question of globalism versus nationalism. I mean, the question is, I think that's harder to determine is, where does the change come from, the progressive change come from? And I mean, does it come from rebuilding national, social democratic agendas within borders, or does it come from something cross-border? And that I'm not sure what the cross-border options are. That's the problem with that argument, isn't it? But I'm also not convinced that you can sustain a sort of democratic recovery, in one nation. Nations are too penetrated and permeated by global influences and corporations. So there needs to be something which establishes solidarity. I mean, you can get glimpses of it, in the response to Gaza. I mean, the greatest crime of our lifetimes is what's happened in Gaza, and you can see all over the world people are responding to that in human terms and humanitarian terms, and there's a lot of solidarity and a lot of commitment, which people share. So maybe it's those touchstone issues which might be able to, open up a bottom-up politic that crosses borders. And I guess the ecology is the best bet in that regard. The terrible truth is we seem to have to get worse before we can get better. That you have to have a Second World War before you discover the virtues of the welfare state, which fortunately was in effect that lasted 30 or 40 years. Do we have to have an absolute ecological disaster before we discover the importance of our independence with nature? And we do that on a democratic basis in communities in the way that George Monbiot in The Guardian talks about it. I mean, maybe that is the case, but I do think you're right that higher education has a role in the resurrection of democratic thinking. The difficulty we've got is that higher education, and Trump has shown this, can be so easily towed into the status quo. And and the control is through the corporate university structure. It's the corporate university which has made it much harder to preserve academic freedom. And Trump's shown that, by arguing the pragmatics of institutional survival and threatening to cut off money, or actually cutting off money, or you can get university presidents and university boards, trustees to do what you want. And once that happens, then some of the academics have got nowhere to go and they start resigning, and hoping that they can move somewhere where they can do their work more freely. So I think so we have a problem with higher education institutionally. So I think what we're looking at then is more informal kind of civil society of higher education, the networks, the discipline groups, the student organisations. Students, I think, have potentially a great role here because they are also natural internationalists and work well across borders.
Brilliant. As always, students that lead the revolution, which is great. We have one question, which is quite a long one online. Cedric, you are giving us the account of the costs and the implications of coming to send your daughter to study in UK. Do you want to summarise that very briefly?
Hello. So long story short, I was in the UK last month to visit a couple of Russell's League universities with my daughter. She's French. She wants to study in the UK STEM. And I would like to give two angles to what has been said. The first element is value of money. It's going to cost 50k per year, 4 year, 200k plus living cost, probably 250 to 300k to come to the UK to get a STEM degree, while in France it would cost me 2k per year. So the rationale is, shall I pay 20k and give my daughter a 200k check when she graduates, or should I send her to a UK university? I think the answer is pretty obvious for all the university bar Oxbridge Imperial. Pretty much. The second element I wanted to, and the conclusion of that is, I'm still wondering that for the top 3 universities, for all the universities in the UK, you have probably already cut yourself from EU students. I mean, there's not a single parent in her right mind who would pay so much for an OK. So, and it would still be the case, because at an affordable price, and I'm not even saying going all the way down to what the UK, the British are paying, just to get the benefits of studying abroad, etc. The second element, which is very critical for me and has not been touched, is when I was looking at the campus and I saw the population which was studying STEM subject today in the UK, most of them, when they were not English or British, were from India and China. So said differently, you are training strategic competitors of Europe in absolutely critical areas, while cutting Europe from one of the very, very best education possible. Have you given some thought on it or not at all?
So I think you're absolutely right about the relative cost of education in the UK and Western Europe. I mean, and we all know, I think, in the UK, how good a lot of universities are in Western Europe. You can get, I mean, the Dutch system, the Swiss system, every institution's really good, really strong. Nordics, lots of great universities in France and Germany. You know, it doesn't make much sense, does it, to go to the UK and pay foreign student fees? And I think the UK universities medium term are on dangerous ground in thinking that their prestige value enables them to do, charge a fee that level, even with relation to the rest of the world. Where I part company from you is I'm not sympathetic to the argument we should hold down the non-Western world as long as possible to preserve the position of Europe and North America. I don't see any good reason why we should perpetuate the colonial era. I think that the way forward internationally lies in understanding what colonialism is, going beyond colonialism, and being able to start to work on a kind of global governance architecture which allows different traditions, different parts of the world to be strong and to make a contribution to the whole on the basis of sharing hybridity, unity and difference, if you like. I mean, I think that's the only way forward. Preserving Fortress Europe or Fortress America, which is what Trump is doing, it isn't going to solve our problems ultimately. And I think China in particular shows that you can't hold it down. The country's too strong. The tradition is deep. The educational scientific tradition is deep, and the educational tradition is probably the strongest in the world. You can't, and it's not because of Western education that China and India ultimately are going to succeed. It's because of the agency and capabilities of their own people. So nothing to be gained by trying to keep a lid on other cultures, other societies, potential competitors in a narrow sense, if you like, and a lot to be gained by everyone understanding each other and working together better.
Great, thank you.
Can I also, just if I could add, I think Brexit has normalized that view that we have to secure our borders, that all the nations are competitors and we are threatened by foreigners. So I think Brexit was a symptom of that, but it has also strengthened that sort of ideology that security should prevail. Research collaboration, educational collaboration, should take into account all our security concerns, how we need to secure our borders, how to make sure that the spies do not come in and steal our sort of advances in research and so on. And I think that sort of thinking is becoming more prominent, and we have started to accept it. There's more and more acceptance, even in science policy, that security should prevail over collaboration and knowledge sharing. So Brexit is a symptom, and it has also reinforced. And we also see what's happening in the US. I mean, the tensions between the US and China are also sort of a symptom. Things that we come now to see, oh, well, Indian students or Chinese students could be a threat. I think they're just a symptom of what is going on now. Those divides and those sort of closed doors policies and perceptions.
Yeah, Brexit, the Greek gift that keeps on brewing the treachery and ruin. So we got two last questions in the room. I think you had that first. You want to respond to that question particularly?
Yeah, I was looking at the second question, and I thought, because you are interviewees, they talk about the loss of diversity and equality and the loss of having this discussion on international perspectives. And we know that like non-EU students are were always there. So does it mean like the non-EU international student will not add value to the diversity and quality? I mean, it may be an implicit assumption that the senior officials at those universities do not consider those non-EU universities, non-EU students as like valuable, not having an international perspective, or the EU students are just special or more valuable than other students.
I mean, I think you've hit quite an important point, and something in the evidence, from the interviews is that there's a sense that Europeans are like us, they're white, they look like us, and so we've lost our friends, our cousins, and there's other kinds of foreigners. There's more different people who don't look like us. The only ones we have, and that's a bit of a drag. That's a kind of loss of diversity, which of course is really disappointing, but not entirely surprising. What's perhaps more surprising is that that pro-European outlook hasn't in some ways perpetuated and continued after Brexit, because if you go onto an institution campus now, you get a sense that people have kind of forgotten about the European engagement, and they're still taking the money from Chinese students and being nice to them, and so keeping the money flowing, but not really engaging with China properly or thinking about what Chinese civilizational and Confucian cultures entail and what they have to offer worldwide, and not really engaging in the many diverse traditions of India, and bringing their students into their own educational thinking that way. So yeah, things you've hit upon, I think, a kind of partial or sort of level of parochialism, which was certainly there. But I guess that pro-European outlook was a start. It was at least it was looking beyond the UK, and the strength of the universities, it seems to me, so they did go a fair way out of just being England or Scotland or Wales or Ireland centred, and thinking beyond the UK, and thinking Europe at least was a larger field of activity and a larger identity, and for some perhaps a larger orientation or set of values. And the next step might have been to start to embrace the rest of the world. And unfortunately, that process was cut off by Brexit.
Yep. One more question to make us feel really miserable.
I'll be brief in a couple of different things. Firstly, I find this framing incredibly generative. Like we are in a real risk of fascism with this kind of nativist moment that we're in. And I think not putting that front and centre of kind of questions about politics and policy kind of missing the moment we're in. Secondly, just kind of on this international students question, I wonder if, whilst appreciating the cosmopolitanism that it brings, what we risk doing to a degree is missing the exploitativeness with which some of this expansion has come, in the sense that we say to students in South Asia or other parts of the world, come to the UK with the guarantee of a route into a graduate visa, job, this kind of thing, that then has the rug kind of pulled out from underneath them, right, in ways that actually it ends up not being, what the agency sold them kind of initially. And then I suppose my my question, just on your empiricalness, I was thinking through those kind of the different people in the universities who must be seeing what they see as the self-inflicted crisis of Brexit, and oftentimes be a very big disagreement with the, say, communities that they're working in, or kind of communities around the university, yet see themselves as people who work in universities are people who fundamentally serve their community and a public mission. So I wonder, like, to what extent did that tension of people trying to kind of understand, well, it was the will of the people, it was what people wanted, but we think it's going to be really bad and we're trying to manage, like, to what extent could you kind of feel that through the interviews?
Yeah, so can I,
You go to the Silky, I'll come into.
yes. So we did see in cities where the vote was in favor of Brexit. So
Like
the,
Kew,
and Coventry also, we did see that the participants were very, very careful on how to frame things. For example, that it was interesting that Kew Coventry did not talk about diversity because simply I think diversity there it comes in the more traditional sort of sense of students from underrepresented backgrounds, whereas participants in other areas did include European students in that concept of diversity. So they were usually more sort of guarded, I would say, because they were able to, I mean, they understood that they were at odds with their environment. Some people, although I think there was something interesting, they talked about European students engaging with local communities, and they said how active they were and how they were sort of embracing opportunities for community engagement. And they also saw those European students as sort of almost providing a sort of a window to the outside world, to those students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So they felt that within the classrooms, these links and relationships were growing and developing, and that enabled those students from disadvantaged backgrounds to sort of come and encounter, the other different viewpoints, and those disadvantaged students could then, go back to their communities, so they would carry some of those views and perceptions. So through that, that was one interesting point, and the other was, as I said, that European students appear to be really engaged and connecting directly themselves, going out, doing outreach, connecting to local communities. So there was, I think, a big awareness of that need to kind of link the international with the local. And yes, some sort of caution from those who were located in cities with Brexit vote.
I'm drawing on a larger set of sensibilities, other people's work as well as my own here, but I mean, my sense is that there are many people in the UK, and I'm thinking partly about a project on universities and public good that we did more or less the same time as the Brexit project, that don't buy into the market consumption model particularly, and think that the role of higher education is to serve communities, to serve the world, and to serve the nation, all three, and are particularly concerned about locality and about community, especially outside London, where in London the national community doesn't have quite the same bite. But cities like Nottingham or Sheffield and Newcastle, I mean, those places, the region and the city really matter, and having an orientation to the community is a very strong mission for many people. And of course, when the communities decided to go take national identity in a certain direction, that becomes an obligation to the university as well. And yet, of course, it doesn't, not in full. And I think that the kind of explanation for all of this and all the sort of contradictions that we seem to live with most of the time is that the university has multiple roles, it has multiple spheres of operation. That's its strength as a sort of social institution, and why it has lasted for so long and gone through so many transmogrifications, is that it's able to do many things at the same time, none of them in full, if you like, and not really face the consequences of that. And what something like Brexit does, and perhaps every national election in a winner-take-all system, terrible system that the UK has, is that it sort of makes the choices binary. You know, you're either one thing or the other. You're either nationally loyal or you're not. You're either getting Brexit done or you're against the will of the people. You know, this sort of stuff. And when that sort of notion is dropped on you, all your multiple identities get problematized rather quickly. And so universities really don't have any way through, because the whole terms in which the Brexit debate is and its reading is conducted is different to the terms in which universities themselves operate. So different, in fact, that you can't find a logical solution to the problem. So, but I think that you know, people look for, do what Vassiliki said. You know, they look for different ways they can make junctions and so on. And you do find when you talk to academics and mid-level managers and university leaders about internationalisation, international students, is that, and now I'm thinking of non-Europeans as well as Europeans, they'll always talk up the way in which international students are brought into the community and doing good works and so on and making friends with local people. And when you go and talk to the students, they give you a different story. They say, you know, no one loves us, and basically, no one makes the effort to really connect to us properly. And, you know, we have problems with local students. We have more problems outside the classroom. And, you know, the university says it's all, you know, hunky-dory, but it isn't, you know. So I think there are lots and lots of unsuccessful or half attempted efforts to try and bring communities together across these divides, but it's rare that you find really strong examples, and they're the ones we should probably focus on.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think that's a positive note to end on, because we could then have all the negative stuff given. Well, yeah, I think you've showed us that 8 years on, this was the existential issue for Britain, and it's deepening, and those pictures you showed us, Simon, gave us that impression of what the stakes are for our next election. So thank you very much, Simon, and thank you for launching this book with us. The book online is all available, download for free, as there are several other CG books coming out in the next couple of months, and they're on our links on our website. Do join us next Tuesday at later time at 4 p.m. with a Californian speaker talking about A Tale to Apartheid, settler colonialism, subjugation in South Africa, and Israeli higher education. This is a really important work. I've been looking forward to welcoming Maya Windy for a while, given her book on Israeli universities and their work in supporting occupation, and a connection with South Africa as well. So thank you all for coming, and thanks everyone in the room as well for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you.